Clara stood silently at the kitchen counter, the wooden spoon trembling in her grip as she stirred the simmering pot of soup. The rich aroma filled every corner of the house, but it couldn't mask the crushing anxiety swelling in her chest. Her eyes flicked to the wall clock, past 10 p.m., and still no sign of Victor. He used to call. Even a quick text when running late. Now? Silence. Cold, stretching silence. His absence wasn't just physical anymore. It was a ghost that haunted every room, a quiet betrayal that clung to their once passionate marriage like mold in a forgotten corner. Clara tried, she tried, to believe he was simply overwhelmed, that this growing distance was just a phase. But deep down, in the pit of her gut, she knew. Something had changed. And it wasn't going back. Earlier that morning, Gertrude, Victor's ever-blunt mother, had twisted the knife deeper. A woman who can't bear children isn't a real wife, she had hissed, her tone as icy as her stare. The words hit Clara like daggers, sharp and merciless, carving into scars that had never really healed. No matter what Clara did, no matter how hard she tried to please her, she was never enough. Gertrude had never welcomed her, never truly accepted her into the family. And Victor? He had long stopped standing up for her. Now, he didn't even flinch when his mother spoke cruelly. His silence screamed louder than the insults. How had things unraveled so completely? This was the same man who once whispered sweet dreams into her ears, the one who promised forever and held her like she was his entire world. Now he barely met her eyes, barely acknowledged her presence. The front door finally creaked open. Clara's heart leapt and she rushed to greet him, hope flickering in her chest like a dying candle. But the moment she saw him, the flame was snuffed out. His tie hung loose, and there, unmistakable, was the scent of someone else's perfume clinging to his clothes. A scent Clara didn't wear. Victor didn't even meet her gaze as he walked past, stiff and dismissive. "You're still awake," he muttered, his voice flat, almost irritated. Clara's heart fractured all over again. She wanted to ask him, "Where have you been? Why do you smell like that? Who is she?" But the truth? The truth might break her in ways silence couldn't. So she swallowed her pain. "I made your favorite," she whispered, voice shaky, fragile. But he was already gone, bedroom door shut, shutting her out along with it. Clara stood there, alone in the middle of the life they once dreamt of together. A home that had become a prison. A marriage that now only echoed memories. And yet, she still believed, somewhere deep in her unraveling soul, that love, true love, wasn't supposed to end like this. But what if it already had? Clara kept telling herself that if she just held on a little longer, if she was patient enough, things might snap back into place. That maybe, just maybe, they'd find their way back to how they used to be. But deep down, even she had begun to realize, love wasn't enough when only one person was holding the line. That morning, she set the breakfast table in silence. Her eyes drifted to Victor's dinner from the night before, still untouched. Another night he hadn't eaten. Another night he hadn't cared to explain. She swallowed the tight knot in her throat and tried to distract herself, filling his mug, adjusting the cutlery, faking normalcy. But the loneliness crept in like a cold draft under a locked door, seeping into her bones. Then he walked in. Victor looked exhausted, but not the kind of tired that came from work or sleepless nights, not that kind of honest fatigue. This was something else. Something darker. He didn't greet her. Didn't glance her way. He just grabbed the mug and took a long, slow sip, eyes heavy with something unreadable. Then it came. Out of nowhere. Cold. Sharp. Unforgiving. "Maybe if you weren't so broken, this marriage wouldn't feel so hollow." The words hit Clara like a punch to the chest. Her breath caught, the plate in her hand trembling before she carefully set it down, stunned. "What?" she whispered, barely recognizing the sound of her own voice. Victor didn't flinch. "You heard me," he said, eyes cutting through her like glass. "I've given you years, Clara. And for what? There's nothing to show for it." Her heart thudded painfully, rage and grief surging like a storm. Was this really how he saw her now? Just broken? A disappointment? I've done everything I can, Victor," she stammered, voice raw. "I've seen every specialist. Taken every test. I never stopped trying. It's not," her voice cracked, "it's not my fault." Victor let out a sharp, bitter laugh and ran a hand through his hair like her words were static in his ears. "It doesn't matter," he muttered, almost to himself. "The truth is, We're never going to have a family. And I'm tired, Clara. Tired of holding on to something that's never going to happen." And with that, he turned and walked away. No emotion. No hesitation. Leaving her in the kitchen with her heart in shards at her feet. From that moment, the late nights multiplied. Victor stopped pretending. There were no more pitiful excuses about work, no half-hearted apologies. He didn't care to cover his tracks anymore. He came home at ungodly hours, disheveled, shirt wrinkled, and always with that same unbearable scent. A perfume Clara didn't wear. There were moments Victor touched her in ways he shouldn't have, not the physical kind, but the kind that betrayed a heart already turning elsewhere. And Clara, deep down she had known. Her heart had whispered the truth long before her mind was brave enough to accept it. But knowing and accepting, those were two entirely different wars. The first time she confronted him, her hands were clenched tightly at her sides, knuckles pale, voice trembling with a volatile mix of fear and fury. "So it's true?" she asked, breathless. "There's someone else?" Victor barely looked up from his phone. His expression was blank, like she was some background noise interrupting his scroll. "What do you want me to say, Clara?" he replied, no trace of guilt in his tone. "You can't give me what I need." "She can." Her heart stopped. The room tilted. The air itself seemed to vanish. "You swore to love me," she whispered, her voice shattering mid-sentence. "I swore to build a life," he corrected coldly, locking eyes with her. "A life that includes children. And you can't give me that." Tears welled in Clara's eyes, burning hot with humiliation and devastation, but she refused to let them fall, not in front of him. Not after this. Not when he was already tearing her down piece by piece. She wanted to scream. She wanted to remind him of the nights she stayed by his side when the world had nothing to offer him. Of how she supported his dreams, carried his burdens, loved him through storms. But none of it mattered now. Because Victor had already let go. Without another word, he grabbed his coat, his keys, and walked past her like she was furniture. No apology. No hesitation. Just a quiet message that his future didn't include her. Clara sat motionless in the dim bedroom, the silence so loud it roared in her ears. Her hands gripped the fabric of her dress, wrinkling it with every pulse of pain. She had poured everything into Victor, believed in the vows they made, clung to the promises he once whispered. But now, all of it felt like a beautifully orchestrated lie. Part of her wanted to believe she had imagined it. That maybe she was overthinking. That she had twisted his actions in her mind. But the truth had already taken root, sharp and undeniable. He didn't love her anymore. Maybe, he never truly did. Her chest ached as she remembered the venom in his voice. The way he had flung her pain aside like trash. The resentment in his eyes that once held tenderness. That night, when the doubt gnawed at her like a rabid animal, Clara did the one thing she had always sworn she wouldn't. She crossed the line. She waited until Victor stepped into the shower, his phone carelessly left on the dresser, unlocked. Her hand trembled as she reached for it. 1 second of hesitation, and then she opened it. Her breath caught as the screen lit up. Message after message. Flirty. Secretive. Emotional. And there it was, Isla. She wasn't just a suspicion. She was real. The late-night meetups, the sultry messages, the way Victor spoke to her in ways Clara hadn't heard in years. Then came the final blow. "I should have never married a barren woman." The phone slipped from her hands and hit the floor with a dull, lifeless thud. Clara sat still, but inside, something broke forever. Whatever was left of her heart turned to dust, scattered beneath the crushing weight of his betrayal. When Victor stepped out of the bathroom, casually drying his hair, he didn't even glance her way. He had no idea she had seen the messages. No clue she was sitting there with the knowledge that everything they built had been reduced to ashes. She wanted to hurl the phone at him. To scream until her lungs gave out. But all she could do was stare at him, hollow, numb, drowning in disbelief. How had she ever loved someone capable of this level of cruelty? The next morning, Clara awoke with a numbness that touched every inch of her skin. Her body was heavy, but her mind was spinning with the weight of what she now knew. The betrayal hung in the air like smoke, clinging to her, choking every breath. Victor walked into the dining room looking sharp in his expensive suit, not a trace of remorse on his face. In fact, he looked almost free, like a man who had finally dropped the mask. And Clara? She stared at him across the table, her heart empty. There was nothing left to salvage. The marriage she once held like a sacred treasure was already over. She just hadn't signed its death certificate yet. Whether Clara was ready to admit it or not, that afternoon confirmed her deepest fear. A sharp knock echoed through the hallway, and when she opened the door, she was greeted not by her husband, but by a stranger in a suit. The lawyer handed her a stack of neatly bound papers. The words stamped across the top were clear and unapologetic. Petition for divorce. No warning. No conversation. No goodbye. Just a pile of pages that screamed finality. Clara's fingers trembled as she held them, her vision fogging with tears that refused to fall. Victor hadn't just walked away from her, he had already sealed the ending before she had time to catch her breath. She wanted to hate him. To tear the pages in half, march into his office and throw the pieces in his face. To scream at him and ask, "How could you erase me like this?" But deep down, she knew, fighting for this marriage was like clinging to broken glass. It would only cut her deeper. Later that evening, they sat across from each other in the same living room where their love had once lived. Now, it was just a graveyard of silence. Cold. Hollow. Victor didn't even look at her. "Just sign them, Clara," he said flatly. "Let's not make this harder than it has to be." His voice was devoid of emotion. As if in his mind, she was already gone. Clara raised her eyes to meet his one final time. Not as his wife. Just as a woman seeking one last truth. "Did I ever matter to you?" she asked, barely a whisper. Victor exhaled deeply, rubbing his temples. "You were convenient." And just like that, every illusion Clara had clung to shattered. The moving boxes were stacked in the corner of her modest new apartment. It wasn't the grand house she had once shared with Victor, but it was hers. The space was unfamiliar, the walls still echoing with uncertainty, but in the silence, Clara felt something she hadn't in years: freedom. She didn't have to shrink herself anymore. She didn't have to beg to be loved. She didn't have to live unloved beneath the same roof as a man who had emotionally abandoned her long before he ever signed the papers. But freedom comes with its own weight. That first night alone was brutal. The silence screamed louder than arguments ever had. There were no footsteps in the hallway. No sounds of a key turning in the door. No husband, no pretend home. Just her. Clara curled up on the bed, wrapping the sheets around herself like armor, and for the first time in a long time she cried. But not for Victor. She cried for the version of herself that had loved blindly. For the years lost to someone who had never truly seen her. For the hope that had quietly withered. But this pain, this breaking, would not define her. The next morning she rose slowly, wiped away the remnants of that long night, and stood in front of the mirror. Her reflection stared back, raw, wounded, but still standing. Not Victor's wife. Not Gertrude's disappointment. Not the barren woman. Just Clara. And Clara was going to be okay. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and whispered to herself, "You are enough." Then she turned from the mirror and stepped forward, into whatever came next, leaving the weight of the past behind her. Weeks passed. Clara sat at a small cafe near her new place, hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea she hadn't yet sipped. The city around her moved in flashes, alive and vibrant, a stark contrast to the numbness that still clung to her heart like frost. The divorce papers had long been signed. The apartment had been unpacked. The chapter with Victor closed. But the scars? They still stung in the quiet hours. Sometimes she still woke up gasping from dreams laced with his voice. "You're still barren." It wasn't just what he said, it was the way it lingered. How it made her doubt her worth. How it haunted her even in freedom. But Clara had made a decision. She would not let his voice echo louder than her own. Instead of crumbling, she rebuilt. She applied for a position she had once only dreamed of, a managerial role at a prestigious interior design firm. Years ago, Victor had convinced her a wife belonged in the home. That ambition was unnecessary. That her dreams were distractions. Not anymore. This time, she chased them. The interview was intense. The panel of executives watched her closely. But Clara held her ground, speaking with a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. She was no longer a woman begging for love. She was a woman fighting for herself. When the call came later that week offering her the job, something stirred inside her that she hadn't felt in years. Pride. That night, she poured herself a glass of wine and stood by the window of her apartment, small, imperfect, but hers. And as the city lights blinked in the distance, she realized. This was only the beginning. Clara stood on the small balcony of her apartment, the cool night air brushing against her skin like a whisper of freedom. It was quiet, peaceful, the kind of peace she hadn't known in years. No more tiptoeing around Victor's moods, no more shrinking into the background. She had made it through the storm. She wasn't the shattered wife anymore. She was Clara. And Clara was just getting started. The morning sun poured into her new office, golden light dancing across her desk as she carefully arranged her things. Her first day. A fresh beginning. She took a deep breath, forcing down the nerves that fluttered in her chest. This wasn't just a job, it was a declaration. That she had survived. That she was rising. The office buzzed with energy, footsteps echoed through polished halls, phones rang, laughter echoed from distant rooms. As Clara adjusted her chair, trying to get used to this new rhythm, she heard a smooth, commanding voice behind her. "Welcome to the team." She turned, and found herself face to face with Ethan Lawn. Tall. Composed. Broad shoulders. There was a quiet confidence about him, the kind of presence that didn't need to announce itself. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't performative. He just was. And his eyes, dark, kind, curious, met hers with a warmth that startled her. He didn't look at her the way Victor used to, like she was small. Inconvenient. She'd heard of Ethan before. The CEO. A self-made powerhouse with a reputation for being sharp, focused, and brutally efficient in the boardroom. But this man, the one smiling at her now, wasn't just a headline. There was gentleness beneath the power. "Thank you," Clara replied, trying to ignore the unfamiliar flutter low in her stomach. She hadn't thought about attraction in a long time. And she definitely wasn't ready for it. But Ethan felt different. Throughout the day he checked in, not out of obligation, but out of genuine care. A simple word of encouragement. A small suggestion. A quick smile in passing. Nothing overbearing. Nothing patronizing. Just supportive. And slowly, Clara began to realize. Not all men were like Victor. Some could be kind. Some could help you grow without crushing you. As the day drew to a close and she stepped into the golden wash of sunset, Clara caught herself smiling. For the first time in forever, she wasn't just surviving. She was living. Weeks passed. And Clara bloomed. She discovered that she was good at this, brilliant, even. Her ideas sparked innovation. Her presence couldn't be ignored. The team respected her. Her confidence grew like a fire newly lit, steady and unstoppable. And Ethan was there, always just enough. He wasn't hovering. He wasn't overpowering. He challenged her. Pushed her to think deeper, reach higher. But never once did he diminish her. Where Victor had belittled, Ethan uplifted. At first, she kept her distance. Her heart had built high walls, fortified by years of heartbreak. But Ethan never tried to knock them down. He just showed up. Again and again. Quiet. Steady. Reliable. And somewhere between late-night meetings and shared laughter by the printer, Clara realized. She was opening up. One evening, while working overtime in a quiet corner of the office, Ethan looked at her, not just with curiosity, but with genuine concern. "There's a sadness in your eyes," he said. "The kind you try to hide when you think no one's watching." For a moment, she wanted to deny it. But then the truth spilled out. She told him about Victor. About the loneliness. The betrayal. The divorce that nearly crushed her spirit. Ethan didn't interrupt. He didn't try to fix her. He just listened. And when she finished, he leaned forward, his voice low and certain. "You're not broken, Clara. You were just with a man who never deserved you." Something cracked inside her, but not in pain. It was the shattering of doubt. The crumbling of old lies. For the first time, she believed it. She wasn't broken. She was strong. She was whole. And when Ethan reached out, gently lacing his fingers through hers, she didn't pull away. She didn't need to. Because somehow, she was ready to feel again. Days later, Clara sat alone in a small clinic, her fingers clutched tightly around the edge of the exam table. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She had told herself this was just a routine checkup. That the nausea, the dizziness, the fatigue, it was just stress. Nothing more. But as the doctor returned with the results and her world tilted ever so slightly, Clara realized. This was more than just a new beginning. This could change everything. Clara had tried to convince herself that the nausea, the fatigue, the dizzy spells were nothing more than the result of long hours and stress at her new job. But beneath all that logic, there was a whisper. A delicate, flickering hope she didn't dare entertain. After all the years of being told she was barren, after Victor's cruel words and the heartbreak that had followed, she had stopped letting herself imagine this moment. And yet, here she was. Sitting in a quiet clinic. Hands clenched. Heart racing. The doctor finally turned to her, eyes soft, lips curved in a smile that somehow already knew. "Clara," he said gently, "you're pregnant." Time stopped. The word echoed in her mind like a bell, loud, unbelievable, overwhelming. Pregnant. The very thing Victor had mocked her for. The reason he had thrown her aside. Was now her truth. Tears filled Clara's eyes, her hands flying instinctively to her stomach. Are you sure?" she whispered, voice shaking. The doctor nodded. "Not only that," he said, "you're carrying twins." A sharp sob escaped her lips, strangled with disbelief. Twins. Double the love. Double the joy. Double the redemption. After all the pain, all the scars, life had finally handed her something beautiful. That evening, Clara sat on her bed, her hands gently pressed against her still flat belly, overwhelmed by emotion. Doubt whispered in her ear, could she really do this? Alone? Could she be the mother they deserved? As if the universe heard her silent fears, Ethan appeared in her doorway. The moment she told him, he froze, and then his face broke into something she had never seen in Victor's. Pure, unfiltered joy. He dropped to his knees, gently cupping her hands. His voice cracked as he whispered, "This is the best news I've ever heard." And just like that, the fear melted. She wasn't alone. She never had to be again. Meanwhile, across town, Victor sat in his lavish office, a glass of whiskey swirling in his hand, his expression blank. The screen in front of him glowed, but he wasn't reading it. The silence around him was loud, oppressive. He had everything. A luxury home. A booming business. A young, beautiful wife. And yet, a hollow ache gnawed at him. Isla, the woman he had once idolized, had become a stranger. Their marriage, built on fantasy, had withered fast. The passion had evaporated within months, replaced with icy silence and empty arguments. Worst of all, the one thing he'd left Clara for, the one thing he thought Isla would give him, a child, had never come. Despite all the doctors, all the procedures, all the money, nothing. And unlike Clara, who had fought for their marriage, Isla didn't care to pretend. She burned through his money like fire to dry leaves, flitted from one event to another, barely acknowledging him at home. She hadn't saved him. She had punished him. That night, in the stillness of his massive cold house, Victor found himself picking up his phone without even realizing it. He typed Clara into the search bar. Nothing. Her number, gone. Her social media, erased. She had vanished. And for the first time, regret dug its claws deep into his chest. Where was she now? Was she happy? Did someone else see her the way he never had? A sharp pang struck him as he realized the truth. He might never know. And that terrified him more than anything. Clara stood before her full-length mirror, smoothing the emerald gown over her softly rounded belly. She almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. Gone was the broken wife, the woman who once shrank under Victor's disdain. In her place stood a woman radiant with power, confident, calm, glowing with purpose. Tonight was the company's annual gala, a luxurious event swarming with the city's elite. As one of the lead designers, Clara had been invited not as a guest, but as a respected creative force. And Ethan? Of course he insisted on being by her side. His support was constant, effortless. As they entered the dazzling venue, all eyes followed her. There were whispers. Stares. People noticed. She wasn't the same woman. But Clara barely paid attention, until she saw him. Victor. Standing across the room, stiff in his tailored suit, drink untouched in his hand. His once arrogant expression was dulled, almost uncertain. His eyes locked onto hers. And in that moment, the air shifted. He looked different. Older. Worn. And Clara? She didn't flinch. Because he was looking at the woman he lost. And she was looking at the life she finally found. Victor's gaze dropped briefly, but unmistakably, to Clara's rounded belly. Confusion flickered across his face. Then it hit him. His lips parted slightly. His posture shifted. And for the first time in his arrogant, tightly controlled life, Victor Lancaster was completely, utterly speechless. She watched him closely. The flicker in his eyes, shock. Then disbelief. And something dangerously close to regret. For years, she had imagined this exact moment, standing tall, radiant, unshaken while he realized what he had lost. She thought she'd feel vindicated, triumphant. But standing there in front of him, she felt nothing but calm satisfaction. She didn't need his reaction. She didn't need closure. She didn't need him. Ethan's hands gently slid around her waist, anchoring her with his quiet strength. And without a second glance, Clara turned her back on the man who had once been her whole world. Victor was the past. And she was done looking back. As she walked deeper into the venue, surrounded by admiration, elegance, and respect, Clara knew one thing with absolute clarity: this was the best revenge. Victor couldn't breathe. He stood frozen, drink in hand, watching Clara disappear into the crowd. His chest constricted, his fingers curled tightly around the glass. Her hand rested over her stomach protectively. Pregnant. Not just pregnant, glowing. Alive. Full of something he had long believed she would never have. The realization crashed into him like a wave of steel. All the taunts. The accusations. The cruel words. The divorce he had insisted on. And now, here she was, radiant in emerald, admired, loved. Carrying not just life, but his failure. He took a sharp sip of his drink, the burn doing little to numb the ache clawing through his chest. This wasn't possible. She had been barren. She had to be. He had convinced himself of that lie so many times, it had become truth in his mind. His excuse. His escape. But now, watching Clara thrive in a room full of people who respected her, he felt something foreign and corrosive creep in: shame. She had risen without him. She had become stronger, freer, complete. And she had done it with another man by her side, a man who looked at her the way Victor never had. As the night dragged on, Victor found himself unable to look away. Every smile Clara gave, every gentle laugh that danced from her lips, was a dagger to his pride. The woman he once knew, the one who flinched at his tone, who tried endlessly to please, was gone. In her place stood someone unstoppable. And for the first time, Victor truly understood the gravity of his mistake. But the worst part? This was only the beginning. He barely slept that night. His thoughts spiraled, his mind a minefield of questions and denial. The rational side of him wanted to believe that Clara's pregnancy had nothing to do with him, that she had found happiness elsewhere and moved on completely. But the timeline, it didn't make sense. If she had been infertile, if she truly couldn't bear children, then how? Was it a miracle? A hidden treatment? Or, and this was the thought that burned the deepest, had she always been capable of conceiving? Had she simply needed patience, love, all the things he had refused to give her? The more he tried to shake the questions, the deeper they clawed into him. And Victor Lancaster was not a man who tolerated uncertainty. By sunrise, he was already on the phone, calling contacts, pulling strings, pressing people for answers. If there was any way to know the truth, he would find it. He had spent years believing he made the right decision, that leaving Clara was justifiable, that she had failed him. But now, that entire illusion was crumbling. What if she had never been the problem? What if he had been blind to her strength, her worth, her truth? What if the life he always wanted was standing beside Ethan now? His obsession deepened. He couldn't sleep, couldn't focus, couldn't breathe without seeing her smile in his mind, glowing with motherhood and surrounded by love. She had once worshipped him. Now, she barely acknowledged his existence. The power shift was undeniable, and it drove him mad. Victor wasn't used to being the one left behind. He wasn't used to being the ghost haunting someone else's story. But now, He was the outsider looking in. And the truth was tearing him apart. Victor couldn't focus on anything else. Not his business. Not his wife. Not the glossy facade of the life he had built. None of it mattered. The only thing that consumed him now was Clara. He needed answers, desperately, obsessively. He needed her to look him in the eye and acknowledge him, explain what no one else could. So when he found out she'd be attending another high-profile gala, he knew what he had to do. The venue sparkled with luxury. Velvet drapes, golden chandeliers, a sea of whispers floating above the clink of champagne glasses. But Victor didn't see any of it. His eyes searched for only one person. And when he found her, it knocked the breath right out of him. Clara stood beneath the lights, draped in a deep crimson gown that shimmered against her skin, her baby bump more pronounced than before. Her laughter rang out, light, unburdened, as she smiled up at Ethan, the man who had replaced him so seamlessly. Victor's chest tightened. His fingers curled around his glass. That used to be him. She used to look at me like that. Now, he was just a ghost of the life she had left behind. Before he could stop himself, he was moving, cutting through the crowd, heart pounding with a twisted mix of fury and desperation. He reached her. The music seemed to soften, the room tightening with tension as curious eyes turned toward them. "Clara," he said, his voice low and urgent. She turned slowly. No fear. No nervousness. Only calm detachment. That indifference hurt more than any insult. "We need to talk," Victor muttered, jaw tight. Clara tilted her head, one brow arched. Her voice rang out, loud enough for the onlookers to hear. "About what, Victor?" she asked. "About how I was barren. Or about how you left me for a woman who couldn't give you the child you claimed to want so badly." The room gasped. Victor's face flushed crimson, the heat of shame burning through his skin. She wasn't playing the timid wife anymore. She was exposing him. Unbothered. Unshaken. Unreachable. And in that moment, Victor realized he had lost her. Not just physically. Not just romantically. He had lost her in every way that mattered. Click on the right to corner of the video for the part 2. What did you learn from this story? Drop your thoughts in the comment section, leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notifications so that you'll be notified whenever we drop our next videos. Also share this video to someone who might be interested. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more.